A while back, I did a video talking about why living in the Star Wars galaxy could be horrifying for some pretty regular reasons, like all the chances you have to die. But today we're going to be going through some of the more traditionally spooky parts of the galaxy, and talking about how Star Wars has handled some of the more standard creepy tropes, from zombies to ghosts to vampires and eldritch horrors. Star Wars' most direct experiments with zombies take us to Project Blackwing, also known as Imperial Bioweapons Project 171A. This Imperial project created a virus which would, after infection, silently duplicate until quorum sensing allowed the virus to react when sufficient viral load was present to entirely take over the host's body. According to a medical droid, scientifically the goal was, quote, slowing the normal course of decay in living tissue. Ideally, the virus would be able to take over nerve receptors and make the muscles fire even after clinical death had resulted, end quote. So basically, the infection would kill people, usually by clogging their airways with big gluts of grossness, and then once dead, the virus would take over, ambling around and attacking others both to feed and to spread itself. The virus could be spread through regular exposure, but the most surefire way to ensure someone was infected was for one of the zombies to bite someone else. The resulting zombies were not intelligent per se, but they could learn and adapt in their hunt for food. So if they were failing to get into a given room, they would stop just scratching at the door and even start using weaponry sometimes. This Imperial project actually had its origins among the ancient Sith. A Sith Lord named Darth Driar, 4,600 years before the Empire, had developed the original pathogen with Sith alchemy, thinking he could use it to extend his own life as long as he could prevent it from killing him first, something which involved a ritual with a person who had a high midichlorian count. But like so many Sith, Driar really fumbled the ball. He didn't manage to fulfill his ritual, and like so many Sith, his attempt to live forever is what ultimately killed him. A millennium later, Darth Scabrous tried to do further experiments on Driar's work, gathering students and test subjects on the planet Otisar Faustin. Predictably, this ultimately led to a massive outbreak of what was known as the Sickness, killing Scabrous and his test subjects, overrunning the albeit small populace on the remote world, none of whom liked this video or subscribed for more. Palpatine and Vader basically found out about this and decided it would be a great idea for them to try themselves. When the Empire attempted to redevelop the Sickness with Project Blackwing, the Star Destroyer, which had a very fitting name, Vector, carrying some of the laboratories, had an infection break out. It ravaged the entire crew and was spread to the prison ship Purge when Purge became stranded near it several weeks later, overall killing all but 4 of the crew between both Vector and Purge. A doctor named Zahara Cody was able to develop an antivirus which could fight back the infection in limited ways, as well as immunize people against further infection. At one point, she actually uses some of her antivirus on one of the scientists working in Project Blackwing on Vector. He had been killed and fully taken over by the virus, but once injected, he actually tried to communicate with Cody and give her information on what the virus was doing before it kind of quickly wore off, implying at least some presence of the original person in the zombie, and the potential to maybe cure them if the damage to the rest of the body wasn't too severe by the time the virus had taken over. Sometime after the events on Vector, the Empire established a research facility on the already spooky Dathomir, where yet another outbreak occurred because nobody ever learns anything, and also meaning Dathomir got the Halloween double whammy of witches and zombies. This particular facility and outbreak occurs in the Star Wars Galaxy's MMO, and actually brings in some of the characters from the Death Trooper novel where the project was established, namely the Doctor Zahara Cody and Trig Longo, one of the other escapees. The other 2 escapees from Death Troopers were a pair of minor characters, how do you pronounce this, Han Solo and Chewbacca, and they make an appearance in this Galaxy's plotline as well. Cody and Trig were able to give out some of Cody's antivirus, although we never really know the exact end of the Blackwing project. Luckily, these Blackwing variants of the virus at least weren't especially resilient, and they required a consistent resupply being near the source of the infection. Otherwise, the virus wouldn't be able to remain strong enough to maintain control of the host bodies, and the host bodies would continue their decomposition, fairly quickly dying off, again. Moving from zombies to ghosts, naturally you have your standard Force ghosts, which we see throughout the movies, and you also have the trapped souls of ancient Sith like Marka Ragnos and Exar Kun, and even Palpatine, who tried to take control of new vessels to prevent their own deaths. But in my opinion, the spookiest Force ghosts we see are in the Lake of Apparitions in the Fate of the Jedi series. The Lake of Apparitions exists in a Force dimension called Beyond Shadows. This was accessed by Force users separating their consciousness from their bodies, with each area beyond shadows corresponding to a real location in the galaxy. It was most commonly traveled to by a group of Force sensitives called the Mind Walkers, who lived in the long-abandoned Sinkhole Station deep in the Maw. Luke and his son Ben learned how to get beyond shadows from the Mind Walkers in their quest to learn what had happened to cause Luke's nephew Jacen Solo to fall to the dark side and become Darth Caedus. In the lake, they were able to talk to Force spirits who rose out of the waters, called the Mirrors of Remembrance, and yes, everything had that kind of name where it was the something of something. They talked to several of their own deceased family members, including Luke's wife and Ben's mom, Mara Jade Skywalker, Luke's other nephew, Anakin, who had been killed in the Yuuzhan Vong War, and Jacen Solo himself, who had twinges of his Caedus personality, and I think the interactions with him are what really build up some of the spooky feeling of this. To me, just generally, the Force spirits in the Lake of Apparitions had the most ethereal quality to them, compared to just regular Force ghosts who felt very much of the world they were in, and where you kind of knew where they stood. The Mind Walkers being a kind of weird cult that let their bodies waste away while meditating to access Beyond Shadows helps reinforce the vibe, but honestly I haven't read the series in a while, so it might just be kind of bumped up in spookiness in my memory. The vampires of Star Wars come in the form of the Anzati, a species widely feared and hated in the Star Wars galaxy as they famously fed on the life force of other beings, drinking it in through a pair of tendrils which they could retract to help blend in. They're able to use a kind of Force hypnosis to lure prey in, like thralls in stories about vampires. The life force they drank was called soup by the Anzati, and the Anzati believed that individuals who were particularly vital or even just lucky, often reflected in Force sensitivity, would be the most satisfying meals, although how lucky are you really if you're getting your brain sucked out by a space vampire? The Jedi tended to avoid adopting Anzati within the Order, as they believed that the Anzati would be especially susceptible to falling to the dark side by the lure of soup, taking advantage of their training and position of influence to feed on more innocents. Despite this hesitancy, several did become Jedi over galactic history, but this also sometimes meant that the Jedi's fears came true. One such case involved Wolf Karko, who served as a Jedi for decades having never tasted soup, before deciding he should reward himself with one little treat just to see how it was for his own good behavior. After all, a powerful Jedi like himself could never become addicted. But this began a quick slide to the dark side, as he drank more soup, including from other Jedi. He was locked by the Jedi Council into a stasis field on Kifex, where he remained for at least 1,000 years. Before being killed by Quinlan Vos around the time of the Clone Wars, he was believed to have telepathically lured other Anzati to the planet, draining their own vitality and reducing them to essentially feral monsters barely able to speak. Viewed with distrust as they so often were, the Anzati also became the subjects of many legends around the galaxy. Some believed, albeit with no evidence, that those who were drank by the Anzati could become Anzati themselves. Finally, for our Eldritch horror. Well, Abeloth gets a lot of the attention in this category as the mother in the Mortis family, and with a lot of speculation in Ahsoka that the show may be leading to her being brought into canon, today I want to look at my personal favorite, a being known as Mnggal-Mnggal. This creature existed from the earliest days of galactic civilization, at least by its own account. According to some, the danger it posed to the galaxy may have been why the Celestials, who ruled the galaxy before the Rakatans and the Republic, created the hyperspace anomaly separating the known and unknown regions. Mnggal-Mnggal was, at a basic level, comprised of vast amounts of gray ooze, able to form itself into rudimentary shapes and act as one being, regardless of how spread out its constituent ooze became. It would disguise itself as different types of creatures, or simply use different forms to move parts of itself around, but its primary goal was to take over whatever it could, infecting individuals and using them as hosts, so in some ways we're back to zombies. Going through a being's standard orifices like the mouth and nose were easiest, and probably some other ones, I won't talk about those, but it could also enter through openings as small as pores if it had to. Mnggal-Mnggal would then digest the host inside slowly, taking it over and attempting to use it to find more potential victims, either by creating new pools of Mnggal-Mnggal for unlucky creatures to happen upon, or simply by expelling some of itself onto the new potential hosts. Mnggal-Mnggal was also highly intelligent, mentally torturing its victims in various ways, like reuniting grieving parents with children who it had taken as a host already, and finding other ways to trick people into allowing it access to areas with other new potential hosts. It could also communicate directly, having learned various languages from every period of galactic history. In the unknown regions, Mnggal-Mnggal had managed to cover and wipe out many worlds, most notably Mnggal, which was entirely covered in pools of Mnggal-Mnggal. The world was surrounded with signs of Mnggal-Mnglal's past conquests, including ships from the ancient Greece civilization, and even from Zim the Despot's empire, which was on the opposite side of the galaxy from the unknown regions and existed 20,000 years before the empire. The crews of these ships had been taken over and then jumped towards Mnggal or other worlds taken over by Mnggal-Mnggal. Other species in the unknown regions greatly feared Mnggal-Mnggal, with some coming to know it as the Rot God. Entire unknown region civilizations like the V's Empire are known to have fallen to the Mnggal-Mnggal, while the Chiss and Croak, along with other powerful unknown region civilizations not starting with C, took active measures to prevent the infestation from reaching their own worlds. The Chiss in particular kept the most detailed records on the location and capabilities of the Mnggal-Mnggal, and even employed bounty hunters to root it out. That's only a small chunk of the spookiest parts of the Star Wars galaxy, but I hope you've enjoyed the video. Special thanks as always to the patrons, whose names you're seeing on screen and whose support makes the channel possible. Remember to like and subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see covered on the channel in the future.